Welcome back to another episode of the Flying G Huddle, your inside look into Gladwin football. I'm Casey Campbell. I am your host, and we are pleased to be joined each and every week by Gladwin head football coach Mark Jarsfer. Hello, Mark. How are you?
Doing great. How are you, Casey?
Doing good. You have a new addition to the set here. Can you want to talk about that thing that's sitting there behind you?
Yeah, we love those little walnut mittens in Gladwin, and so just had to get it in the shot here.
Of course, if you haven't heard, Gladwin defeated Ogama Heights in the district final to claim their, I believe it's their third district championship in school history.
Yep, third in school history.
Yeah. Why don't we just go through, just talk about the game and stuff like that, and because
Yeah,
the back and forth game with two really good teams. Of course, they got you guys in the regular season, and you got them in the playoffs.
yeah, absolutely. And this is kind of a scenario that we had been pitching to our kids ever since that initial loss back in week 3. You know, we lost that one, a tight one, 5-point game to Ogama in week 3, 5-point game to Clare in week 4. And we told our kids the entire time, every week thereafter, we're going to see one of those guys again in the playoffs, and it'll likely be for a district title. And so, you know, they just kept believing and fighting and doing what they needed to do to get themselves into the playoffs and have that opportunity. And so then kind of, you know, turn into the game, Ogama got the ball first. We got them into a 4th down and short. It failed to get lined up correctly, and they ran a fullback dive right in the gap that we left open, and got on the board first. You know, luckily for us, we had a great response, drove down the field, and then on our own 4th down conversion, threw a little hitch touchdown pass to freshman Bronson Bigham to tie things up. And then there was a lot of back and forth there in the rest of that first quarter, until we got back on the board with another Bronson Bigham 39-yard catch from Finninger, and then Eric Rogo made the extra point to put us up 14-7. Ogama, you know, responded with a little counter pass to make it 14-13. They were not able to get in on the botched conversion, and then Finninger had a 23-yard run before half to make that 21-13. So, you know, we went into halftime and we had that conversation with our guys that was basically the same exact score from the year before at halftime, where we had the lead. And, you know, last year we didn't do a good enough job and we didn't hold on to it. Ogama, you know, came back and won that game. And so we said that we needed to, you know, keep our foot on the gas and play like our playoff lives depended on it, because they did. And so then we came out in the third quarter, and our drive stalled. But you know, we forced them to punt, and then Trace Corlew took a 44-yard punt return in for a touchdown where he had to have broke 5 or 6 tackles. Just a spectacular play. Ogama did get on the board again later, you know, to make it closer, with another counter pass, same play that they got us on the time before, and that was for another long touchdown. They didn't get the 2-point conversion there. And so that's kind of, you know, how the game ended, with some back and forth action, but at least the scoring stayed the same. So 28-19 final. As you mentioned, you know, it's the 3rd ever district title in Gladwin history. And they're special just because, you know, when you win a district title, there's only 8 teams left in the playoffs. And so, you know, you're in pretty good company when you get into that group. And obviously to get to that point, you have to beat other good teams. You know, having to beat Kingsford and Ogama on back-to-back weeks. You know, their records combined between the two of them was 18-1. Took out the number 3 seed and their 3 ranked team, I guess, and number 5 or 6, depending on what polls you're looking at. And now our sights are set on Frankenmuth, which, you know, again, depending on what poll you look at, is 1 or 2. And that's another rematch game for us.
We'll obviously get to previewing Frankenmuth a little bit later in the show, but now it's time for our district final MVPs of the week.
Yeah, I mean, I had a hard time with this one because obviously, Finninger played really well, threw a couple, ran for one. Bigham had another big game with a couple touchdown receptions. But I think the guy that kind of made everything work for us was Preston Willard on offense. He had a great night carrying the ball for us with 16 carries, 91 yards, and a lot of those just tough, gritty yards running through contact. And just that constant threat of him getting the ball in the middle opened up a lot of things for us on the outside that allowed those other guys to work. And so I don't think, any of those other guys would disagree that he was a main reason why we were able to have so much success everywhere else. And he's just a super tough kid, the heart and soul of our defense, does all the gritty things on offense. And so he was our offensive MVP that week. Defensive MVP would have to be Matthew Lechner. He had a heck of a night on offensive line and on the defensive line. He ended up with 11 tackles, 2 sacks, and 3 TFLs on the defensive line. From our defensive, end tackle position, played in at nose tackle a little bit for us when Caden Reed was down with some cramps. And he's just a heck of a player. Like the amount of work that he put into the offseason to get himself in, a position to play at this high of a level is something that should be like admired by a lot of the underclassmen and potential returning players that we have for years to come because he was just somebody that contributed last year. But now he's a playmaker for us on both the offensive and defensive line, and so he's our defensive MVP. And then our special teams MVP would have to be Trace Corlew. When you get into these games that are kind of close, a lot of times it ends up being special teams that makes the difference. And you look back into our week 3 matchup, and Trace returned a kickoff for a touchdown, which was our only offensive points that game, and we lost 12-7. And so in that game it gave us a chance to be right in it the entire time. And then in this game it was the one that kind of sealed the deal and put us up for good with that punt return touchdown. And so as I've said a million times, he's just a special player, impossible to replace in years to come. But for this week, he's our special teams MVP.
Yep. Okay, so now it's time to talk about a staff member for this week.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many guys that go into making this thing go. I know I've already talked about a few of them with Emiett and Goodwin and that kind of thing, but it's worth re-mentioning those guys in the amount of time that they put into film study and getting these things right. I want to say Emiett had like 12 and a half hours of film last week, and Goodwin wasn't far behind. And those guys are primarily working on the defensive side of the ball, and to hold these last 2 teams that, as I mentioned, were 18-1, to the output that they held them to, and put us in a position to be successful, is impressive as heck. It's solely on them, the level of success that we're having with their preparation, and then the kids buy into it too. Like they see how much work that those guys are putting in, and it just makes them want to play for them, I believe. And so they've come up with a couple great game plans defensively, and our kids have really bought into that, and we've done a good job of holding people to minimum amounts of points, and on the way to winning ourselves a district title. And so I know I've already talked about those guys, but I just can't say it enough how fortunate I am and our program is to have high level assistants like that. Those guys could literally coach anywhere in the state, and probably at a collegiate level if they opted to. But I'm glad I got them with me.
Yep. Okay, now it's time to preview the regional final. Of course, that would be against Frankenmuth. Of course, you guys met up each other week 9 with Frankenmuth coming out with the win. What's it gonna take to get to get another one of those wooden mittens and get the win in the regional final?
Yeah, I mean, as I talked about in the lead up to that game last time and in the post game, they are as good of a program as we have in the state of Michigan. They're just so consistent and so good. They're so well coached and talented players. But that's really the case with pretty much all the teams that are left in the tournament when you get to this point. As I alluded to earlier, there's only 8 teams left. And after this weekend, there'll only be 4. And so, anytime you're playing ball this late into November, you're doing, really good things. And so when you get to this point, obviously you have to minimize turnovers, take care of the ball, manage the game correctly from a clock standpoint, and obviously come up with a good game plan and execute it. And so that's what we're working on over this weekend as a coaching staff is coming up with a game plan both offensively and defensively that's going to put our guys in a position to be successful. And then throughout the week, we'll coach these guys up on it and get them to buy in the best that we can and go give it a whirl. And so regardless of what happens, we feel that we're gonna go out there and put on a great showing. And if we play our absolute best, we have just as good of a shot as anybody.
All right, well, that's going to do it for this week's episode of the Flying G Huddle. Tune in next week where we'll preview the semifinal game, or we will do a season recap. Yes, we will be on once again, regardless win or lose.